Hey everyone, Archon here. Before this video begins, I would just like to quickly discuss the Shattered Glass event that's going on in the Discord server right now. The fashion show is currently live, and I encourage all of you to submit your favorite Shattered Glass characters, whether they be original or recreations. The fashion show deadline is the 21st of November, so be sure to have been submitted by that date. With that out of the way, I'm continuing on my trend of making full videos explaining groups of Cybertronians, which I've offhandedly mentioned in previous videos. Today's video, I will be expanding upon the lore for one of the most iconic groups of Decepticons in Cybertron's history, being the original Combiner in more ways than one, and one of the most devastating weapons used against the Autobots and the Wreckers. Today's video will be all about the Combiner known as Devastator. The Constructicons began their journey way back in the Age of Functionism, where they were at the very bottom of the caste system, being construction workers and all. Yeah, it makes so much sense that the people in charge of building your society are also the lowest possible class in your society. However, while the Cybertronian world government would see this group of construction workers as the lowest of the low, they actually gained a high amount of respect among the lower class, and even some politicians. You might be wondering how this construction team managed to be so well recognized among their peers. Well, it's because the Constructicons were the most prestigious architects on Cybertron of all time. Formed of a group of Cybertronians named Scrapper, Mixmaster, Hook, Long — that's hilarious, his name is literally Long in the Cybertron games due to a misspelling — Scavenger, Frontloader, Bonecrusher, and Erector. Yeah, apparently Erector is canon. And that's not even the best part. Apparently he was kicked out of the Constructicons because he wasn't green. They were responsible for the design and construction of some of Cybertron's most iconic and holy of sites. From the temple above the Well of Allsparks, to the Chamber of Primes, and the entire city of Iacon itself. The Constructicons were responsible for building the most important locations on Cybertron, since Primus himself constructed them. Not only did they build some of the most important locations, but also their craft was exquisite and beyond beautiful. Building the immaculate views of the stellar galleries, the statues of the 13 primes surrounding the Decagon within Iacon, and even the Crystal Road connecting Crystal City to the Iacon archives. So with their exemplary skill at building some of the most important and recognizable sites in Cybertron's history, you'd think that they would be treated rather well by the high castes, right? Well, of course you'd be right, and the Constructicons would never face any discrimination ever, and they lived happily ever after. Nope, of course they faced some of the worst treatment from the higher castes out of anyone, because unlike the rest of the lower caste, who had to just take it from invisible politicians from above, these guys were in the same building as the people discriminating against them. The Constructicons would repeatedly have their work halted, as they were denied access to the places that they were supposed to work in. Their members were constantly arrested for being found in high caste areas, despite the fact that they were the only ones building the high caste areas. You could imagine that this constant discrimination would build up a silent resentment within the Constructicons. A resentment which would not remain silent for very long, as soon the Decepticon uprising would begin to gain traction. The Constructicons remained largely absent from the Decepticon uprising, at least in the early days. While Cybertron slowly fell to chaos, the Constructicons were employed by the High Council to clean up and rebuild some of the aftermath of the Decepticon terrorist attacks. It was during this highly stressful time that the Constructicons would discover a hidden ability which they possessed. An ability which, in hindsight, explained why they worked so well as a team over the years. The Constructicons accidentally combined. This was an immense discovery for them, as there hadn't been a natural combiner seen in over a millennia, and it would have been a much bigger deal to the High Council too, if not for the fact that the Cybertronian Civil War hadn't just kicked off. It's unclear exactly what caused the Constructicons to join the Decepticons. My guess is that it was their profound power as a combiner which finally inspired them to fight back against the Autobot government. Whatever caused them to join the Decepticon cause is ultimately irrelevant, as they did join Megatron's crusade for a better Cybertron. The Constructicons would find their way throughout Kaon, and were treated by the Decepticon High Command as simple grunts, unaware of their ability to combine. No idea how Shockwave didn't immediately see all of these green Cybertronians who look shockingly similar to each other, and not put together the fact that they were a combiner team. The Constructicons would continue to be reliable foot soldiers throughout the first couple battles of the war, before finally combining into Devastator when the battles got desperate. They decided to name their combined form Devastator after the Devastator winds, a weather event which occasionally struck around the equator of Cybertron, completely destroying much of the central infrastructure of the planet. Devastator obviously saw great success on the battlefield, so much so that there were no survivors to report on the Decepticon combiner. Not only were the Autobots who soon met their end surprised at the sight of the lumbering giant, but so too were the Decepticons. Shockwave immediately became fascinated by Devastator, and ordered the Constructicons to return to his lab within Kaon. There, Shockwave would begin experimenting on the Constructicons, trying to replicate the combiner and create a synthetic combiner. The majority of his experiments would fail, with the combiner teams falling apart completely and becoming abominations. However, the one success he would find was a group of highly trained militarized Decepticons, known as the Combaticons, who would combine to form Bruticus. Before Shockwave found success with Bruticus, however, Megatron would ask his lieutenant for reinforcements to conquer Crystal City, to which Shockwave would provide the Constructicons, to Megatron's glee. The city was guarded by a small handful of Autobots, thinking they were safe within the refracting walls of crystal surrounding the city. The Autobots were unfortunately caught off guard by the massive Decepticon force, which they were completely unprepared for. Fortunately, they could still rely on the impenetrable walls of pink and blue crystals outlining the city. That was until Devastator torn down that wall, letting thousands of Decepticons into the streets to gun down any Autobots and politicians. Some Autobots would manage to escape from the city, such as Ironhide, but many lost their lives to the Decepticon invaders. The Battle of Crystal City left the once beautiful vacation destination completely destroyed, the smoke and fires visible from across the horizon, with Devastator standing tall among the Decepticon victors. Man, what I wouldn't give to see Devastator destroy this city. Seeing just how successful Devastator was in battle, Megatron ordered the Combiner team to lead their own assault on the nearby science capital, Tegan Heights, believing the Combiner more than capable of recreating the success of Crystal City. The Constructicons would take a contingent of Decepticon forces to Tegan Heights, and began assaulting it. However, they were quickly surprised by a new enemy combatant found within the city. See, the Decepticons were again suspecting a small Autobot defense force. However, inside they were met with traps and ambushes, instigated by the Wreckers. Most of the Decepticons were easy kills for the Wreckers. Devastator, however, was too powerful even for the highly skilled militants. However, deep within the city limits, a Wrecker combiner would be created by Perceptor, a combiner named Ruination. Really quickly, let me clear something up here in the lore. I'm entirely aware that in the books, this is actually Superion. However, it makes significantly more sense for this to actually be Ruination. Not only because Ruination actually exists in the games, he has a model, he's in Fall of Cybertron's promotional material, and he's actually a Wrecker combiner, but also because the characters that make up Superion don't even exist in the lore. You can't make a combiner out of characters that don't exist. As such, it makes significantly more sense for this to be Ruination, more so than Superion. Also just because, Ruination has grown on me so much more after researching these games. Ruination would seek out Devastator in the heart of the city, soon doing battle with the surprised Decepticon combiner. Their battle was truly devastating, but by the time the smoke and rubble had cleared, Ruination stood tall as the victor. Now, this is where most of you would think the Constructicon's story ends. I've said so in previous videos, after all. Well, that's not technically true. While it is the end of Devastator's story, it would not be the end of the Constructicons. You see, when Shockwave was doing his experiments to replicate Devastator, his first thought wasn't to give other Cybertronians the ability to combine. It was to recreate Devastator. So Shockwave went about cloning the Constructicons, meaning there are potentially hundreds of clones of the Constructicons around and among the Decepticons. Which makes sense. The Decepticons need to be able to build just as much as they destroy. Otherwise, they would simply run out of resources. It also makes sense as to why the Constructicons are mentioned in Fall of Cybertron, as they're a well-known class of Decepticon. However, it's likely that these clones lacked the ability to combine, resulting in Bruticus being the last Decepticon combiner. Despite the fall of Devastator, it speaks to the Decepticons' twisted perseverance, that they lived on, creating a better life for Decepticon civilians for the brief time that these clones remained. So that's been the lore for the Constructicons and Devastator in the Cybertron games. I'm pretty sad that they don't have a proper design, instead they just kind of use the G1 design, but I am happy that they do actually exist in the lore. And I'm also really happy that they have such good representation, as they're kind of the Decepticons' heart, their moral goodness. Sure, they were used to destroy and attack Autobot civilians, but then they rebuilt the cities afterwards. They were trying to make a better Cybertron for the people that they believed in. They were trying to make these great, grand cities, and they were doing it out of the love of the Cybertronians who lived within them. And as such, I've gained a whole lot more respect for the Constructicons in the lore. They're an indispensable part of Decepticon society. Without these clones, Decepticon cities would have fallen to ruin eons ago. It also makes sense why we don't see them in the games, as they don't necessarily fit the fun, shooty war game themes. They're much more in the background building up this society. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Feel free to ask some lore questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. Till all are one.